Hello folks, welcome back to the Vision of Veritas. Looking through the topic that I wanted to cover today, quite honestly, there's just so much. But then I came across the debate between Marco Rubio and Val Demings. So I started to watch it thinking I would gloss through it because usually the issues and the responses are always the same, or at least the same style. You have conservatives who are on point, usually, not always, but usually, and Democrats who generally do whatever they can to pull on the heartstrings of those in the audience. Not simply because they garner too emotion, but generally speaking, facts aren't always on their side. Well, as I started watching this, the stereotype of those two really didn't disappoint. But as I started really looking into this, the two different styles of answering questions that usually run along party lines were extremely prevalent. You had Marco Rubio, who was concise. He knew his facts. He knew how to answer and tackle these questions, and he ran on a record. He wasn't just blowing smoke up somebody's ass to sound good. He actually ran on a record. His record. Val, on the other hand, we saw really a few things. We saw, one, her harping the point home that her father was a janitor and her mother was a maid, trying to make the attempt to empathize with those who may be of lower income. She had many snarky personal attacks against Marco Rubio, but Marco Rubio stood steadfast. He didn't fall for it once, and he never gave it back to her. Not only because he couldn't, because if he even tried, number one, she's an African American. Number two, she's a woman. That's two strikes against him. If he even tried to play the games that she did, he would have been torn apart in the media everywhere. And good on him for recognizing that. The playing field is not level when it comes to personal attacks. The way he was resolute in his answers, though, even if he could get away with it, I truly don't think he would have even tried because he didn't need to. The other part of what we saw here were questions specifically tailored so that if Marco Rubio answered them in a specific way, the media could run with them. We're going to go through all of this here, but I wanted to point that out. These questions, some of them specifically, were very calculated. They weren't asked to find out a candidate's answer, specifically Marco Rubio. They were asked specifically to garner or usher an answer from him that would allow the media to twist, that they could try to make headlines with until this election is over. And again, the man, it was masterful. He did not fall for it. Man, I wish this guy was in Pennsylvania here. Anyhow, let's break this down. And I was originally just going to do a couple points, but I think what was done was so well, and the tactics of both sides were so prevalent that I don't think just running through a few examples does it justice. I think that the way some of these questions were asked, the way each candidate responded to them, and how certain specific questions were asked simply to garner that response for the media, I think it needs to be exposed, brought to light, and I really believe they need to be addressed. If nothing else, it shows you how it's a concerted effort for no other reason than to paint Democrats in a positive light. I really believe this backfired on Val here. And it also backfired on the individuals asking the questions. When Rubio sensed a trap, and you can tell when the guy does, his body language is different to different questions, and he was very calm, collected, and on point, and my hat's off to that guy. But he ran in, he sprang the traps that were set against him, and he turned it around for a positive. The man is masterful at his craft, and he did it well. So enough of my telling you about it, let's actually listen and go through this here. I'm not going to do each and every question, but I am going to do a majority of the ones that bring about the point that I'm trying to make here. And quite honestly, it is most of them that are asked.
3 weeks ago tomorrow, Hurricane Ian hit Florida as one of the 5 most powerful storms to make landfall in the U.S. What federal action is needed starting now to protect Florida from sea levels projected to rise a foot or more in less than 30 years, while more frequent monster storms threaten our lives and livelihoods?
Well, thank you so much for that question, and let me say good evening to all of you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Palm Beach State College. It is an honor for me to be here. I stand on this stage as a daughter of a maid and a janitor who grew up in Florida. Had the honor of serving as the police chief in the House, and now standing on this stage. I grew up in Florida, so I know all too well the devastating effects that hurricanes can cause on our state. And number one, we have got to get serious about climate change. Climate change is real. If we don't do something about it, then we're going to pay a terrible price for it. More intense storms like we've seen. as the waters in the ocean continue to warm up, more intense storms, more flooding, more just devastation as we've seen with Ian. I've toured the area and I've toured Puerto Rico and seen what Fiona did. The federal government has got to make sure that FEMA has the resources that it needs to adequately respond, but we've got to get serious about climate change.
I also want to thank the college for hosting us here tonight, all of you for being a part of it, everyone for being here in the audience. This is important. I'm glad we have a chance to do it. You ask about the hurricanes. Unfortunately, if you're in public service in Florida, you won't be here long before you're dealing with hurricanes, and we've done so consistently throughout my time in public service. And unfortunately, back in 2017, we had devastating storms, 2018 as well, and now the devastation and destruction that we're still calculating. I outlined last week a very specific plan, obviously it's preliminary, on all the sorts of things that we're going to need help on. These communities immediately need emergency relief. What's happening for a lot of these cities and counties is they have to spend a lot of money up front. Money out of their budgets they have to spend right now to pay for these things, and then they get reimbursed. And so that's why I'm very proud that in 2017 and again in 2018, I was able to get President Trump and the federal government to fully reimburse our counties for the help they needed. But we'll have to do more. There'll be two phases. The first is emergency response, meaning all the things you need as an emergency to help these counties backfill their needs. And then there'll be the long-term recovery. And I'm very proud of the fact that I was involved deeply in all the long-term recovery efforts of the last storms.
And here we have the very first question now. It's about hurricanes. I can't really relate to hurricanes since I'm here in Pennsylvania, but I've seen time and time again the utter devastation that they cause. You notice the first thing that's out of her mouth here? The very first thing she starts to peddle, she starts to enforce or reinforce the idea that she came from very meager beginnings. And you know what? If she did, that's great. That's fantastic that she's worked this far to get, as far as she has gotten. But don't use it to garner a vote here. There was a very specific question asked here. What are you going to do to help out the state of Florida with regards to hurricanes? Second thing out of her mouth here, she said climate change. First it was global warming, then it was global cooling, then it's the polar ice caps are melting. Then it was the shores along the coast of the United States are going to flood. And now it's climate change because A, no one can make up their mind, and B, they're realizing that some of the general public is starting to wake up to this nonsense that they keep forcing down everybody's throats. They can encompass everything with climate change, and because the climate actually does change, from year after year, that's historical record. Nothing is the same. They use that verbiage to now peddle their agenda. So she responds with the typical rhetoric. Rubio here, well, he responds with fact. He responds with an actual outline plan with what he would like to do and what he is doing, what has been done. Sure, there's always more that can be done, but I would imagine that there's only so much that can be done as well. So right off the bat, he's with facts. Right off the bat, she is with talking points and rhetoric. Let's continue with question number 2.
Democrats passed the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan with no Republican support. Now inflation rates, not seen in 40 years, show no clear sign of abating. Prices for just about everything, housing, gasoline, groceries, are way up. A Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco analysis shows injecting trillions of dollars in pandemic relief into this economy caused up to 3% of what is approaching a 9% U.S. inflation rate. And it's worse in Florida. What can you do to help families now?
Well, I think the first thing we have to start doing is stop spending that kind of money. We had already done 2 pandemic reliefs. This came on top of it. And they were warned. The Democrats were warned by Larry Summers, by other Democrat economists, you do this, you're going to fire up inflation. So that's number 1. Number 2 is we've got to begin to produce American oil again. Why are we begging Saudi Arabia for oil? Why are we begging Venezuela and Iran for oil? We're producing 1 million barrels a day less on oil than we used to do just a couple years ago. Instead, we are depleting our reserves. Our oil reserves do not exist to win midterms. They exist to help this country in an emergency or in the midst of a storm. What we cannot do is some of these crazy policies that are coming from the left that Congresswoman Demings has supported. She supported a plan to put a $10.25 tax per barrel of oil, which would have meant 35 cents per gallon more for everyone listening here today. We can't do that kind of crazy stuff. It only adds to the inflation. I think it begins by winning this election and getting people like that out of office.
And that's time. Congresswoman, the same question you may answer, but you have 60 seconds to answer this question.
Thank you so much for that. Of course, the senator who has never run anything at all but his mouth would know nothing about helping people and being there for people when they are in trouble. No one planned the pandemic, but our response to it is everything. Individuals were hurting, families were hurting, businesses were hurting. We passed the CARES Act, which the senator supported. There were some problems in the CARES Act with the Paycheck Protection Program that you love to take credit for. Some say it was poorly written. Some say it didn't help the people that it was supposed to, didn't save the jobs that it was supposed to. There was a way to fix the problems in the PPP through the American Rescue Plan and help people that were in trouble. But you played politics, Senator, and you did not do that. Your number one job as a United States Senator is to protect the health, safety, and well-being of the American people. You've been at it for 24 years.
Does anybody other than me notice the two distinct ways these questions are answered? Once again, you have Marco Rubio here, a matter-of-fact point, very down-to-earth, no attacks on anybody, other than pointing out that his opponent supported policies that don't reflect good. Then you have Val here, on the other hand. The first thing she does is attack him. Not attacking his policy, but she's trying to say that, well, he wouldn't know anything about helping people because he has never helped anybody. What kind of an answer is that? She can't inject fact into this, so she goes for the throat by bringing in emotion? If nothing else, this clearly shows the type of campaign she's starting to run on and the lack of ideas that she actually has. And also, I'm just going to get this out of the way. Now, she says several times throughout this that Marco Rubio's first job is to protect Floridians. That's not his first job, actually. His first job is to defend, protect, and serve the Constitution of the United States, to protect it against enemies foreign and domestic. And in doing that, that is how he starts to protect Floridians. She's already injecting misinformation and trying to pull at the heartstrings of others. Generally, those who are more ignorant of the facts and more susceptible to emotion are going to fall for this line of rhetoric here.
Senator, you said, quote, abortion is the killing of an unborn human being, and that you do not believe the dignity and the worth of human life is tied to the circumstances of their conception. You've now signed on to fellow Senator Lindsey Graham's bill for a national abortion ban. My question to you specifically is, if reelected, if your vote can make a federal abortion ban with no exceptions the law of the land, will you vote yes?
Number one, I'm 100% pro-life, not because I want to deny anyone their rights, but because I believe that innocent human life is worthy of the protection of our laws. That said, every bill I've ever sponsored on abortion, every bill I've ever voted for, has exceptions. Every one of them does, because that's what can pass, and that's what the majority of people support. Now, what was before us today in Congress that you talk about Lindsey Graham's bill, that's a 4-month ban. Okay? That is more lenient than every country in Europe, except for 2. The extremist on abortion in this campaign is Congresswoman Demings. She supports no restrictions, no limitations of any kind. She voted against she's against a 4-month ban. She voted against a 5-month ban. She supports taxpayer-funded abortion on demand for any reason at any time up until the moment of birth. That's what she supports. That's the extreme position here. I have shown a willingness to work with people to save unborn innocent human life. She opposes any limitation of any kind, and no one ever asks them about that.
Congresswoman Demings.
Senator, how gullible do you really think Florida voters are? Number one, you have been clear that you support no exceptions, even including rape and incest. Now, as a police detective who investigated cases of rape and incest, no, Senator, I don't think it's okay for a 10-year-old girl to be raped and have to carry the seed of her rapist. No, I don't think it's okay for you to make decisions for women and girls. As a senator, I think those decisions are made between the woman, her family, her doctor, and her faith. And to sit over or to stand over there and say that I don't support abortions up to the time of birth is just a lie. But to help protect the life of the mother, which you looked at that like it was just, that's kind of a side issue. Senator, you know that you have said you don't support any exceptions. But what you're saying tonight...
Yeah, number one, the bill that she's attacking me on has exceptions. It has exceptions. That's the bill right now. Number two, you want to talk about extreme? Let me tell you about extreme, because you talk about extreme. Here's extreme. Okay? A child that's born alive after a failed abortion. It happened 11 times in Florida in 2017. It happened 8 times in 2020. A child on a failed abortion born alive. And we had doctors in America that refused to treat or provide medical care to a child born alive. And we tried to pass a law that said that should be a crime. That's infanticide. The abortion failed, the child was born alive, and you refused to treat it, and she voted against that. That's how extreme she is. And she still will not tell you. You should ask her, what limits on abortion will you support?
Congresswoman?
What we know is that the senator supports no exceptions. He can make his mouth say anything today. He's good at that, by the way. What day is it, and what is Marco Rubio saying? I've said time and time again, and he knows it, that I support a woman's right to choose up to the time of viability.
So the next question here, anybody who watches debates knows that abortion is going to come up in some way, shape, or form somewhere along the line. Now, instead of just asking each one's stances on abortion and letting them explain, one of the moderators asks Rubio specifically that if it were possible, would you sign on to a federal ban on abortion? You see, this question wasn't phrased in order to allow each one to give the country their opinion. This was phrased in such a way to try to get Rubio to say the unpopular media opinion, which is, yes, I do support a ban. Or if he said the converse, the media would have jumped down his throat for flip-flopping and said that he can't be reliable or trusted. It was phrased and asked specifically to him like this, to back him up against a wall in a no-win situation, but the way he handled it was beautiful. Instead of engaging in a hypothetical which is really completely ridiculous and disingenuous if you think about it. This is a hypothetical situation which would never actually happen because with the way our political climate is, it could never be passed, and that was Rubio's point. Something like this can't be passed, so my opinion is irrelevant on it. I only want to talk about what could be passed or what could be voted on. And quite honestly, that makes a whole lot more sense. He refused to engage in the political BS of the question and actually answer the question accurately to the best of his ability. And in a brilliant move, he actually took it a step further to state that Val was actually the one with the insane view because she was for abortion on demand, no matter what the circumstance or consequences. As long as the mother wanted it, the mother was entitled to it. And if the child was born despite a failed abortion, she was also for infanticide. If there was ever an extreme view, that is an extreme view. And then when she gets around to answering the question herself, she begins it by saying, "Oh, how gullible do you think Florida voters are?" in a snarky, snide smile. You know, I was originally going to go through all of these questions and do it point by point, but as I'm starting to compile this and record all this, I'm realizing this is going to be an insanely long video. And I know I'm not at the point where someone would probably stick around and listen to the whole thing. And you know what? If there was actually one individual that I knew would do that, could potentially take this to heart and sway a vote, I would do that if this took hours. I really would, because I enjoy doing this. But because I don't think that exists, that and I would really just be wasting all of this time. Instead of going through each thing point by point, what I'm going to do is just highlight the points in the different questions where not only the character of the different candidates is displayed, but their ability to garner facts, to present facts, and who's ushering in the below-the-belt personal attacks, which really do nothing but make you look like an uneducated idiot. You know, you're facing off here. You're running to be a senator. You're running to be one of the most important positions in our government. You can make a difference single-handedly, but collectively, you can be a powerhouse. And that really depends on the kind of powerhouse you want to be. You want to be a powerhouse for good or evil. And yes, it is black and white like that. Unfortunately, things aren't viewed today in black and white. People think that, well, whatever I feel today, that's what I can be. But that's not the way it is. Anyhow, let's start looking through the different parts of these questions to really bring out and show the differences in the characters of these two people.
So I'm very proud of my record. In the last 12
you there, Senator.
Todd, may I respond
Again,
to that?
Congresswoman, yes.
Look, the senator has obviously resorted to lying, cheating, and trying to steal. But it's embarrassing that you think that honoring a person who is a hero by naming a federal building after them is nothing. I think honoring a police officer who was killed in the line of duty is everything, Senator. It matters to his family, it matters to his community, it matters to his department, It matters to me.
Okay, a child that's born alive after a failed abortion. It happened 11 times in Florida in 2017. It happened 8 times in 2020. A child on a failed abortion born alive. And we had doctors in America that refused to treat or provide medical care to a child born alive. And we tried to pass a law that said that should be a crime. That's infanticide. The abortion failed. The child was born alive and you refused to treat it. And she voted against that. That's how extreme she is. And she still will not tell you. You should ask her, what limits on abortion will you support?
Congresswoman?
What we know is that the senator supports no exceptions. He can make his mouth say anything today. He's good at that, by the way. What day is it, and what is Marco Rubio saying? I've said time and time again, and he knows it, that I support a woman's right to choose up to the time of viability. I can say to him, and I can say to Florida, we are not going back, Senator, no matter how obsessed you are with the woman's body and her right to choose. We are not going back to a time where women are treated like second-class citizens or like property. And I'll say it again because obviously he didn't hear or he doesn't want to. I support a woman's right to an abortion up to the time of viability. My father was a gun owner. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. This is about taking dangerous guns out of the hands of dangerous people. And the overwhelming majority of people in our nation want us to do just that. How long will you watch people being gunned down in first grade, fourth grade, high school, college, church, synagogue, a grocery store, a movie theater, a mall, and a nightclub,
Congresswoman,
and do nothing?
That is time. I want to give you 30 more seconds, Senator.
Well, everything she's for would have done nothing to stop any of these shootings. Every one of these shooters would have passed the background check that she keeps insisting on. No one here is in favor of mass shootings and violence. And that's why she says we did nothing. That's not accurate. The truth, today, you go to the Department of Homeland Security website, and there's a clearinghouse. She's going to mock it. She shouldn't, because the idea came from a Parkland father. And there's a clearinghouse there that basically tells schools, for example, this is what works for safety and this is what doesn't. And we got that put in there. You know who's trying to take that down? The Biden administration. Because they say that to have a school safety clearinghouse is discriminatory against minority students.
30 more seconds,
Clearinghouse
Congresswoman.
is fine. But Senator Rubio thought that he could reduce this very critical issue to supporting a clearinghouse on the Homeland Security law.
Which boots does she want on the ground? She was against National Guard deployment. They demonized the Border Patrol. And they talk about processors.
Who are you talking about, Senator?
Well, your party.
Who demonized the...
You have, and your party has,
That's
Congresswoman.
a lie.
Absolutely
Look,
true.
look,
and let me tell you something else that they've done.
Look,
here's the other thing they've done. They talk about more processors.
Would you be willing to do anything to win, Senator?
They talk about more processors. Okay, so people, everybody, the Biden administration,
you're
all you have to do is say
At
the
this
magic
point,
words.
You're making
at this
it up.
point,
Stop.
this
No,
has
look,
devolved.
stop
I want to move on to the next
The
issue here,
traffickers
Senator.
give you the magic
Just
words. You
stop.
say and they let you in.
Congresswoman,
More processors
I
to let
am
them
forced
in.
to move on at
How
this time.
gullible do you think people are?
The next
Stop.
question is going to...
Takes $1 trillion out of the Pentagon, okay? Raises taxes by $8 trillion on working Americans, is a socialist budget. And she didn't just have her name on it, she voted for it.
That's your time. Congresswoman Demings, 30 seconds to you.
Senator, you're repeating yourself again. We've seen this show before. Socialists, crazy, Marxist, silly.
But which one
that
does she
must be
prefer?
on your list for your talking points. The bottom line is you said that Rick Scott's plan, it's good to have good ideas. You did not say that you did not support it. I hear you saying that tonight, but when you were first asked about his plan, you said, I think it's good to have good ideas. You remember that?
Congresswoman, Senator, you can respond.
About it. Her name was on that.
The question
people's
was, what
budget.
do you think
the
about
people's budget? The people's budget had her name on it. She was not just a co-sponsor 2 years in a row. She voted for it. There's never been a vote on Rick Scott's budget. She voted for this thing. $8 trillion in taxes, 8 or 9 trillion, I can't remember at this point. What's another trillion, right? You talk about all the other things that were in there. A $10.25 tax on a barrel of oil so that your prices go up by 35 cents. I don't know what word you prefer, socialist, Marxist, crazy. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions about how we
Congresswoman
describe
Demings,
such a nutty idea
Senator,
that would
that's
destroy
your
the country.
time. Congresswoman Demings.
He's talking about the barrel of oil again.
Yeah,
Senator,
everyone's talking about the barrel of oil these days.
Look, you've been in elected office in Florida for 24 years. And what we have been left with is skyrocketing property insurance, lack of affordable housing, health care, gone through the roof. We haven't expanded Medicaid. People are hurting. And you know what, Senator, when I talk to your voters around the state, you know what they say? They don't know what you stand for.
All right, Congresswoman, that's your time, and I'm going to move on to the next.
People need to think about it. Okay, imagine if someone decides, oh, there's a drop box. I'm just going to put some explosive in it and blow it up and burn all of those ballots, and now those votes don't count at all. Okay, there is something, with elections, there are two things that are very important. Number one, the count has to be accurate. The votes have to be counted accurately. But the other is there has to be public confidence. The public has to believe that the elections were fair and balanced, and that's what I've always been in favor of. But what they want is a federal takeover of the elections. I do not want a federal takeover of our election system. I oppose it.
That's time, Senator. Congresswoman?
That's nonsense.
Okay.
That we want a federal takeover. We passed the Voting Rights Advancement Act in the House of Representatives because of the unbelievable voter suppression efforts that were going on by the senator and his party.
Well, which voter
Let
suppression vote was that?
people vote. That's nonsense, what he just said. We want every person to vote. And Senator, we've been busy too, encouraging people to vote. It doesn't threaten me. It doesn't scare me to let the people. And your question involved their takeover of Taiwan. We have to make sure that that does not happen. And as a member of the Intelligence Committee, that is an issue that we are studying every day to make sure that does not happen. Look, the senator can play national security expert all he wants. I know he needs that for his next presidential run.
Congresswoman, I need to stop you there, and I want to give, because you mentioned the senator, another 30 seconds to the senator.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what she means by play national security expert. I'm the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee and was the previous chairman of it, so it's actually my job. But the second thing I would say is I think holding China accountable, that's a talking point. I get it. I'm supporting the concept. It's a great banner. I'm sure it's a good bumper sticker. But it's not a plan. I actually have a detailed plan for how you address it. And one of the things we have to do, you want to hold China accountable, fix this country first. Make things in America again.
Now, we can keep going on this very easily. It couldn't be more clear the differences between the two. You know, personal bias aside, obviously I like Rubio more, but if you didn't know the party of either of the candidate, if you couldn't see them, say if you could listen to them on a radio, and I kind of did that. What I did was I turned off the monitor, I let things play, and I listened to it just to hear. I didn't watch anything. I wanted to take it all in just by hearing it. You can hear the holier than thou, the snarky, I'm better than you, but I have nothing to run on to prove it attitude that Val has versus Rubio. It's truly unbelievable. If you get the chance, listen to the whole thing. Don't just take my word for it. Listen to the whole thing. If you've got the time, listen to it once through watching. Listen to it a second time with your monitor off. And just hear it. You get an entirely different feel for it. There was only one clear, concise winner here. Only one person who brought forth facts and injected truth into this conversation. Even when the moderators tried to trip him up, he still nailed it. It's a shame. It's really a shame that the left has to resort to these kind of tactics, to these collective and consorted efforts in an attempt to use moderators, to use specific questions, to use the media as a whole to try to bring down a conservative candidate. If this doesn't show the collective effort to suppress a voice or voices counter to the specific narrative that's being forced upon everyone, I don't know what does. And furthermore, look to Rubio here as an example of how to calmly and collectively, completely take down someone who has nothing but emotion and talking points to use against you. Anyhow, thank you for joining me for this, this longer episode here. It was going to be a whole lot longer, but I think you get the gist of it. You get the point of it. If you could like, share, and subscribe, I would really appreciate it here. I'm still a brand new channel, and I truly can't do this without you. I really want to expand this. So thank you much, take care, and have a good day.